Social media is broken, but it's where we spend most of our free time. It's an addictive and manipulative machine where we feel like we're in the driver's seats, but in fact, we're all passengers. The problem with social media is that it hasn't been designed for deep connection, which is what we were told it was for, but instead it's been designed for our attention, which is what we don't yet see. The model behind social media is that it wants some of us to strive for fame and building a huge following. That is then monetizable to the rest of us, who are the consumers buying products and services, as the longer these social media companies have our attention, the more products and services they can sell us. In the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, they said that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. This quote originates from a guy called Richard Serra, who spoke about business models of media companies in the 1970s, where he said, "Product of commercial television is the audience. Television delivers people to an advertiser. In commercial broadcasting, the viewer pays for the privilege of having himself sold. It is the consumer who is consumed." Now, from the perspective of these platforms and advertisers, nothing has changed. The model is still the same. Get our attention, sell us stuff. Simple. But for us as the consumer, everything has changed. Companies have learnt what hooks our attention, and those features have been built in. And we must now recognize social media platforms and how they're designed for what they really are and what they're producing in us, which is what scientists call behavioral addiction. Even though the consequences of this social media addiction are phenomenal, with less productivity, focus, an epidemic of loneliness, and plummeting mental health. We're disconnected from ourselves, the people we love, the world around us, and what's influencing us. Hi, I'm AJ. I'm an entrepreneur and community builder in London, and I talk about connection to ourselves and others. And on today's episode, we are breaking down the silent epidemic that is plaguing the modern day Western society, which is disconnection. In this video, I'm going to go into the two major consequences that we feel and experience from disconnection, and then what we can do about it. We're more digitally connected, but we're more emotionally disconnected than ever before. We spend less time in our communities, we spend less time with our loved ones, cities feel lonelier, and we spend less time just with ourselves. A site called the Campaign to End Loneliness defines loneliness as the subjective feeling we have when there's a gap between the social connections we have and those we want. Sometimes we feel a gap in the quality of our relationships, perhaps with those closest to us. At other times, we don't have the quantity of relationships we need to sustain us across a wider circle of friendships. In the Campaign to End Loneliness study, they found that in 2022, just under 50% of adults in the UK reported feeling lonely occasionally, sometimes, often, or always, with 7.1% of people experiencing chronic loneliness, meaning they feel lonely often or always, which has risen from 6% in 2020, which indicates that we haven't had a return to pre-pandemic levels of loneliness, which is a massive issue. Because the impact of loneliness is huge. Studies have shown that social disconnection and loneliness can cause increases in cardiovascular disease like heart disease and strokes. It can also obviously lead to depression, anxiety, and it can even cause premature mortality. And the worst part is that loneliness is concentrated on minorities and people who are already at risk before COVID. This includes elderly and disabled people, single people, people with health conditions, minority racial groups, the list goes on. Which leads us on to the second consequence of this plague of disconnection, which is with our attention, because we're distracted. Here's a question for you. When was the last time you sat and did nothing for, let's say, 2 minutes? Not even meditated, you just sat and looked and absorbed your surroundings. When was the last time? I can't remember the last time that I did that, because we don't anymore. We have these phones, we have the internet, we have access to all this information and people and everything. So why would we just sit and do nothing? Well, the problem with us constantly having our attentions grabbed from every corner of our lives means that we are perpetually distracted and distractible. When we look at our parents or grandparents, people who didn't grow up with technology at their fingertips from a young age, we see them sitting, thinking, talking, reading, learning, playing instruments, doing anything, going and talking to the lady down the street who makes pottery out of her shed but makes horrible mugs. At least they're focused. They're not distracted at every single ding, buzz, whir, whatever it is. They're there, present in that moment. They are more active, energized, and they create, whereas we're passive and we're reactive and we consume. Tim Wu, a Columbia Law School professor and author of the book The Attention Merchants, said, "The attention industry needs people who are in a distracted state, or who are perpetually distractible, and thus open to advertising." When we check our phones hoping that we've had a notification or some other call to our attention, it's like we're pulling the lever of a slot machine hoping for a jackpot. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. And that then causes us to check our phones, check again, just like an addict. And this quote states that just like any other substances, just like other addictive substances, distracting or fun technologies stimulate the pleasure center of the brain and can provide a temporary escape from something in real life. However, the longer someone repeats a pleasurable behavior, the less effective it becomes. This leads to people repeating the same behavior frequently to achieve the same results. This process is the same for substance and behavioral addictions, although behavioral addictions are easier to break, which is what we'll go into next. Lastly, on a more philosophical note, the American philosopher and writer William James said, "Your life experience is what you choose to pay attention to." And if these companies are controlling our attention, then how control are we actually of our lives? So, it's not all doom and gloom. What's the solution? How can we help? How can we fix this epidemic of disconnection which leads to loneliness and distraction? How can we reclaim our lives, our time, and our attention? First, we need to build awareness of how we're spending our time. What does it actually look like? How often have we got on your app usage thing on your phone? How much time are we actually spending on each of these different social media apps which are designed to pull us in deeper? First is awareness. Build that awareness. Questions to ask ourselves include, what does our social media use actually look like? How does that feel within us? What leads us most often to check social media? Is it boredom? Is it some sort of other discomfort? So we understand that cue. That's a good place to start. It can help us build awareness and have more clarity on our own social media and life situation. The second point is we want to turn off notifications. Number 3, limit screen time. There are apps for this. Your phone can do it for you. It just helps you realize how much time actually has passed when using each of these individual apps. And number 4, this is a call out to entrepreneurs that I hope are listening, is that we need to build better social companies. So there's a solution. We have a serious problem and it takes all of us individually and collectively to address it. Otherwise, this epidemic of loneliness and lacking attention is only going to increase and our lives are going to be so much worse for it. Thanks for watching. I'm AJ and see you tomorrow.